Yes, perfect. Yeah. So when I see your trajectory that you worked in some great iconic companies of US like JPL and Silicon Graphic, Boeing, and then in Microsoft. So it looks like uh, you had only success in your life and you just, sailed through all this. But I'm sure you must have been through up and down. So I'm interested to know some of your failures. So something if you can talk about and tell us about your failure and what did you learn from it, because I want people to get motivated and don't uh, be scared of failures. Don't fear the failures.
Yeah.
And that's why I ask all my guests, tell me something about your failures.
Yeah. I've had some spectacular ones. Um, so let me speak broadly and then
Okay.
perhaps give an example. Early on, it's interesting that my failures early on were different from my failures later.
Hmm.
So I did kind of learn something along the way. So early on, it was more about me not paying enough attention to the business and the customer, which is the only reason why we should be doing what we do. Early on, I was more into the technology, doing something cool, right?
Right.
I loved coding. I loved the technology that I was working on, which is a lot having to do with images and things like that early on in my career, a lot of computer graphics, that sort of thing. I was just fascinated by the tech, and I wouldn't pay as much attention to the customer and the business, and it turns out that's problematic. So a
Mm.
lot of my early mistakes were doing, like I did this thing where I was working in Office at the time, Microsoft Office, and my team owned all of the content for Office, so all of the clip art and the photos and the GIFs and that
Right.
stuff. And I had this amazing, cool wavelet matching algorithm for images that I got straight out of Microsoft research and research that was happening at the University of Washington. And you could match these images that looked like each other just visually.
Mm.
I thought, this is great. We own all this content. We can do visual searches. Isn't this great? Turns out customers don't care that A's look a lot like mountains. They
Right.
just don't.
Uh,
What they're looking for, that images that are similar to each other, or images that are similar to each other that on their face you look at them like, oh, those are all similar objects, or those are all of a similar theme, or whatever.
right.
The fact that visually they happen, if you analyze them with wavelets that they happen to look like each other, they don't care about that.
Right.
And eventually, we shipped that feature because I was the manager and said we ship it, but the customers didn't care, and it was cut within a year or two. It's just a mistake. You really need to be thinking about things in terms of the business and the customer. That's what we're there for. That's why we get paid. That's
Right.
and even if we weren't getting paid, we're delivering a service. If the customers don't care, they're not going to use it.
True.
So you really got to understand the business and the customer. And those are the mistakes that I made early on, was that I wasn't paying enough attention to that. And I really needed to. It also helps you win arguments. If you talk about it in terms of the impact and the customer and business impact, you're going to win the argument a lot more than I think it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the early failures. The later failures were about not deeply understanding my leadership, not understanding what's important to them, how they like to operate their businesses, what information is important to them versus what information they don't care as much about. Obviously, all leaders are going to care about the customer, hopefully. All leaders are going to care about the business. But then there's going to be other things that aren't as obvious that they care about or don't care about.
True.
And yet, they are obviously incredibly important to the success of your group, to the success of your own personal career, to the success of the products and services that you're building. So it's really important to understand what your leaders care about, how they like information presented to them, what they find compelling or not compelling as an argument or as just details. And you have to sculpt your message, the things that you care about, in terms that they care about.
Right.
And so the mistakes that I made later in my career about just not being on the same page with some managers that would lead to, some difficult reviews or some decisions that didn't go my way.
Right.
We're all about not spending enough time to really understand basically my management chain and the people who are making decisions
Right.
that impacted my team and myself.
Right. Right. I think this is very, very good advice. Yeah, that we have to have a good understanding, uh, not only about customer and what customers are looking for, but when you get in a position where you were somewhere in the middle. And that time, it's, I think, very important to figure it out. What is the leadership vision and what is important to them? And
Yeah.
it's not easy to figure that out, though. It may sound like it's, can be a simple thing, but I know it's not simple to be aligned and to understand each and every requirement of the
Yeah.
leadership and how
And
to slow down.
exactly right. And also their strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah,
leaders, people like to put leaders on a pedestal. They're
right.
incredible. They're so smart and they're so capable and all this. Obviously, they're just regular folks. They're just people
True.
like everybody else.
Yeah,
They just, they made it up to that level, but, but they're like everybody else. They're going to have strengths and weaknesses. And if you don't understand those strengths and weaknesses, then you're likely to get burned because those
true,
weaknesses, that's going to harm you at some point or another.
true.
Some blindside unless you've done something to mitigate it. And the strengths, you're not going to take full advantage of everything that you could gain from that leader if you don't
Right.
understand what they're great at.
True.
So, you really, it behooves you, even as an individual contributor, to really understand, and especially like you're saying, as someone who's managing in the middle, you really need to understand the people that you're working